Welcome to the Path 11 podcast. Today's episode is going to be a segment of our Food for Thought Friday. I have a woman who I have looked up to through social media, who happens to be a woman in my eyes to be very brave, in touch with her own vulnerability, inspires me to want to tell more of my story. And I see bits and pieces of my story through hers. And our guest today is Tanya Markul. Some of you may know her from Thug Unicorn, if you are a follower on Instagram, but she recently came out with a book called The She Book. So I have been following her probably for a year or two now, and I'm always screenshotting certain posts that she has and quotes, and she's just a wonderful writer. For some reason, her words just completely resonate with me. Of course, I feel like she's writing for me because I'm in touch with everything that she says. I'm like, yes, that's so me, or yes, I needed that. I needed to hear that. And I remember one of the poems or quotes, I call it a quote, but it's really one of the poems that we're going to be talking about too in her new book that I absolutely love, that I felt like was written for me, is number 46 in her book. And it says, "To me, being spiritual means whispering to the trees, laughing with flowers, falling in love with sunsets, consulting the water and worshiping the stars. One hand to my heart, one hand to the earth, and sparkles. Tons of them." So I am so excited that she has agreed to come on and speak with me and have a conversation. And the book that just came out is called The She Book. And The She Book is a collection of 107 poems and prose written for you, because this is your year, she says, to live the life of your dreams, to heal, to witness, to be the one who queens. Once a silent star in the sky, lost, alone, and unnoticed, she began to dream her life awake. Sensitivity brought light to her dark side, and vulnerability found words for what her heart felt but could not say. Pain helped her remember the power within her storm, the wisdom in her breakdowns, and the healing visions hidden within her moonlight nightmares. On her journey to shine from within her deepest ache, she blossomed from what felt like an insignificant twinkle to a blazing, awakening woman. Tanya, welcome to the Path 11 podcast.
Thank you so much. That was a beautiful introduction. Wow. Thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you. And, it's funny. I know that the poem that I had written, when I had gone to your website, it's actually highlighted right on your homepage. And I was like, clearly I'm not the only one who absolutely loves this. But,
Yes.
Yeah, so I really wanted to have you on the show kind of for selfish reasons. I saw that you wrote a book and I interview authors, and I just thought, gosh, if I had the opportunity to sit down with this woman and just learn more about her life and who she is and how you just got so inspired to be so brave, telling your truth, telling your story, kind of shining that light on those darker aspects that so many of us, I think, are afraid and vulnerable to come out with, and just continued to be inspired by you. That's why I wanted to speak to you today. So I was maybe just kind of hoping you can give our listeners a little bit of your background and how you came upon the spiritual path yourself.
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I started writing poetry when I was about 5 years old. I used to write lines on top of lines, and I would call it a poem. And when I was 6 years old, I wrote my first book, and that book was called Little Baby Boohoo. And it was about a little girl who cried all the time, and that book was about me. And then when I was 8, I wrote my second book, and it was about a princess who was to go into the forest and find a lover so she could return home, so she could be happy and return home. And the princess was my mother, and she never found that lover, and she never came home. Mm-hmm. So I have been using poetry and, writing from a young age to kind of, digest my pain and to feel it and to kind of understand what has been happening inside of me. And I was an unwanted child. My mother was 15 when she got pregnant. And I feel even from, being in her womb, I can feel the shame and the guilt and the regret that she felt. And that was kind of like my imprint coming into this world. And on top of that, I was abandoned by my mother and my father, both by the time I was 2 years old. So I was adopted by my grandparents, and my grandfather died. He passed away when I was 10, and my grandmother followed 5 years later. And within all of that, I come from a really low income family, and a family that is like completely riddled with addiction, with unprocessed angst, with depression. I have family members, right now who are in and out of prison. I have family members who are battling with heroin addictions, with alcoholism. So this awareness of kind of my upbringing came to a real realization when my grandfather died, when I was 10 years old. And it was then at such a young age that I realized how deep I could feel. I realized how sadness and loss and loneliness and confusion felt. And it was when my grandfather died that I also realized how alone I was. I didn't have a mother or father to go to. I didn't have anybody who really wanted me. So I was passed around to different family members who really didn't have the space or like the desire to raise me, but could give me a room in their home and feed me, But it was when I was 10 that I stopped writing. I stopped writing altogether. And I didn't have the thought back then for why. I just did. I stopped it because it was an outlet that made me feel. It was a mechanism that gave me a reflection for, my reality. And because I was so young and I didn't have the tools, I didn't know how to process any of that. I naturally went into the way to process these harder feelings from a young age. I started writing from a young age, and then I completely stopped. And I didn't write. I wrote in my journal every now and then, but I didn't express myself, creatively. I didn't take the time to explore the depths, of my words, of my expression. And by some grace of God, I got into college, and I was the first person of my family to go. And I racked up, $50,000 in loans and all of that. And I didn't have any guidance. I knew that I wanted to be an artist. I knew that I wanted to write, but the guidance, the counsel that I got from the university was to not go in that direction because it would be really hard to find a job and it would be really hard to make money. So I listened to that, and I went on the path of journalism because they felt that was a better career choice if I wanted to have a stable income, which is just crazy. So I got a little bit back to my writing, but I wasn't writing about myself. I was writing about other people. So I would say about, 12 years ago, I took a chance. I said yes to the invitation to move to Denmark. And I came to the North, and my whole life just completely broke down. Like everything, everything that I thought about myself, everything that I had thought about life just crashed and burned. It crashed and burned in the biggest way possible. I lost my job and I was depressed. I was having night frights. I was having anxiety attacks on beautiful sunny days. And that was really when I had been practicing yoga and meditation for a while, but not really practicing. It was more of a physical practice to stay in shape. I didn't realize what was actually happening, and it was happening all those years before, which is why I led up to this, huge crash. But that's really when a spiritual practice for me started to awaken. And that's when I started to write again.
Mm. And that was going to be one of my questions too. I mean, aside from doing the Path 11 productions, I'm also a mental health therapist. So, when I hear your story and also think about my own path and what brought me into my spiritual, awakening, and even some of the reasons why I too am a therapist and went into this field, has to do with my entire family as well. Some similar themes that we have here, addiction to alcohol, to heroin, low income, moving around, abandonment issues, and things of that sort. And, so how do you feel like you really were able to kind of keep the pieces together? Because, what I see in so many people and in myself, I always get the feedback like, gosh, how could you be who you are and where you are today with your past? And how are you able to keep it together and be as successful as you are? Whereas there's maybe some people who, kind of come into this world and they might have some of the same struggles as you and myself, and they may continue down that slippery slope of where they're really never able to fully get on that path. And I'm just curious to know, and I think you're kind of getting into it a little bit, but, after your grandparents died, what was the glue for you to kind of get you into college? And, maybe here you are in Denmark, but then kind of putting all the pieces together. What are some of those coping skills that you use to be able to be alive, not commit suicide, not overdose on your own drugs? What?
I mean, I love that question so much, because especially from the age of 10 years old, emotional pain became this tremendous way of self-sabotaging myself. And it made me so apologetic for the space that I took up. And I was embarrassed about my story. And I became really insecure about my authenticity and the creativity that came natural for me. And I entered a time of my life where I didn't like myself at all. Despite knowing that I had something else to offer, I've always known, even since I was a small child, that I have something to offer this life, that I have meaning in this world. But the self-hatred that I had developed because of my childhood kept me hidden. And I also, at the same time, hid my unhappiness. But that unhappiness kept me in crazy toxic relationships, in malnourished friendships, and poisonous mindsets. And I let people think I was weak, and my coping mechanism became letting people believe that I was someone else, because the person that I was, nobody wanted. And I let myself do things that were so far out of alignment from the whole person that I was. I became, a people pleaser and a doormat. And I was like a wall, and I was like a wallflower who was pretending to not be a wallflower. I was an introvert who acted like an extrovert, and I was someone deep in emotional pain who pretended like nothing was wrong. I became the everything is fine, smiling to cover up my pain kind of girl. And instead of going to art class and like band class that I really wanted to go to, I became a cheerleader. Because the wounded child in me, I was so desperate to be seen. I was so desperate to be heard. I was so desperate for approval. And I put on this tremendous charade. And the crazy thing about it is, like, everybody believed it. Mm. I was first runner-up for homecoming queen. I was second runner-up for prom queen. I was voted Miss Congeniality. And not a single person, not even my best friend, knew where I was coming from. And what they really didn't know is that I cried almost every day, that I had suicidal thoughts, that I utterly hated myself, that I was the kid who looked like I fit in, but I didn't fit in at all. And I believed so many lies about myself that I never thought I'd find my way home back to me. So that's the tool that I picked up, was pretending to be someone else and completely ignoring, the healing tool of writing that I knew.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I have to say as well for myself that this wasn't necessarily unhealthy, because I would say that me making that decision to focus on something that wasn't necessarily me, it really saved my life. It really saved my life. I wasn't in a place during those teenage years, where I didn't have a family support. I didn't have anybody of my bloodline to go to. I was still being, rejected by my mother and father. And I lived in a house with 2 alcoholics. So that, becoming someone else really became my armor, and it protected me until I was ready to feel again, to write again, and to allow myself to digest all that had been happening up until that point.
So interesting as I'm, listening to your story, and 2 of the, I guess, would you call them chapters in your book? I know that they're listed 1 through 107, and we're going to talk about that 107. But as I'm hearing this, and I didn't know the story beforehand, the 2 that touched me really deeply was 7 and 8. And I'd like to read them for our listeners. And number 7 says, "Sometimes the scariest bridge to burn is the one between you and the person you thought you were." And so here I am hearing the story that you're telling, and clearly there was a point when you came to the writing again, and maybe it was during that breakdown in Denmark. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about when you kind of found that spiritual path. And number 8 is a lot of what you're talking about here, where you say, "Rejection taught her to let go of what didn't want her. Abandonment showed her how to stand on her own 2 feet. Betrayal awoke her intuition. Pain broke her heart wide open. Loneliness gave her permission to befriend herself." And when I read those 2, and of course, putting myself as, the person reading them and thinking of them in regards to my life, I would say that these 2 moments in your book would also be totally explain when some of my spiritual awakening came too. And it was definitely that bridge that you burn between the person who you thought you are and really the person that you know you are.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about that breakdown in Denmark and how that kind of ignited you back to writing again and getting on the spiritual path.
Yes, I would say, I had been on a slow descent for a long time towards that crash. And I say, it lasted for 15 about 15 years, until I really just completely let go. And it's just so ironic that I traveled to the north. I put a giant salty ocean between my roots and myself, because that's what it took. The distance that I needed to be able to see myself without all that I had come from. And it took that distance and that space for me to feel the magic of it and to become grateful for it and to remember what I had always known since I was a small child, that I had something else to give. So this crash that I had was, it lasted for a while, and I tried to keep it secret, which was also, an obvious coping mechanism that I picked up as a child and a teenager, not having anybody to talk to or anybody, approaching me, trying to talk to me about all the things that was happening in my life. So I came to a point where I had to start reaching out. And I had to start talking about what was happening within me and my mental space and my heart space. And the women around me just started really showing up in my life in a way that I had never experienced before. And that helped to crack me open. And I started practicing yoga. I started, practicing movement with my body in a different way than I had been practicing before. And I took a weekend workshop with this beautiful Swedish teacher, and I just happened to show up to class a little bit early, and her and I were the only ones there. And she had asked me, a question about, what are you doing with your life? And I was like, I don't really enjoy what I'm doing. And she was like, well, what do you really want to do? And I said, I want to write. And all she said was, why don't you start writing?
As simple as that.
As simple as that. And I had made it a huge thing. Of course it was a huge thing for me, though. It was a huge thing for me to go back to writing. But it was as simple as that. And after that weekend workshop, I became friends with this teacher, and that was a huge pivotal turning point in my life. My self-care became a new thing. I rose the bar there, and I started to write again. And that attracted many different things. I started writing online. Numbers are not clear in my brain during the month of September. I swear. It's like the clouds are moving too fast. There's hurricanes in the oceans. The trees are changing. Numbers they don't stick in my brain right now. I started writing again in 2009, to the public. I was writing on my own little blog, and then I started submitting to different online publications, and got into a really intense creative relationship with a person who I would say at the time I felt completely betrayed. It was the biggest betrayal of my adult life. And I am so grateful for that experience. I always knew in that experience that even though what had happened was I felt wrong, and for a short time I felt like a victim, but it was also, like, I would say the last straw that broke the camel's back, as they say, that really kicked me into gear, because I was no longer associated with this brand, and I had been putting all of myself into it, not in ways that were in alignment with me, but I was just so sucked into this toxic relationship that it was just losing myself. But at the same time, I was gaining myself. It's hard to explain, but at the end, when we had left each other, when the final cord was cut, I was like, not F you, I was like, thank you. And I found myself, and I found my voice again, and my writing just took another level. I took another step towards being vulnerable. I took another step towards being raw. I took another step towards being unafraid of just expressing how I feel in a public way. And not doing it because I wanted likes or approval or anybody to feel sorry for me. But I know that in my constitution, like the way that I function, my words and my stories need a place to live. And I feel like those stories and those words want to be shared with others around me, like-minded, like-hearted, like stories, just, people who can relate to emotional pain.
Thank you for listening to this free preview. To hear the rest of this episode in its entirety, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/path11 and become a supporter today. When you pledge as little as $1 per month as a Patreon supporter, you gain access to exclusive interviews, regularly produced guided meditations, future episodes of our weekly podcast before anyone else, and you can also watch our new TV show, Conversations on the Path. This is a one-on-one conversation with interesting people working on interesting projects. Again, that's patreon.com/path11. Pledge your support today and help us change the world.